Hi there YouTube, this is extremewirehead for another Vanguard clan intro. In this series of videos, I look at another clan in the Cardfight Vanguard universe, try to let you know exactly how they operate by themselves, what you would do, what you would think about, and in another part, I will talk about how you will go up against them, how you should treat them, and how you want to finish them off, as they say. Granblue is the topic of discussion today, and Granblue is one of those more technical, more heavily influenced by many different factors, but mostly it is a clan for the advanced, for the very, very skilled players because of the number of different things that they offer. And Granblue is, to put it simply, just a big old clan of pirates. They are mostly undead pirates. I think that's the theme that they're going with. As a Magallanica clan, you will see a lot of influences such as water, a lot of it, sea creatures, and maybe a few monsters here and there, especially ghosts because they are basically dead pirates. Granblue has always been a case of a very difficult clan to balance because of the kind of skill that they operate on. To get down to it, the greatest skill of Granblue is that the drop zone, the zone where cards are usually discarded, is actually their strongest asset. Because of this reason, they are a clan that ends up getting stronger as the game progresses. They actually would prefer if half their deck was in the drop zone at all times. This would mean that they run the risk of decking themselves out, that is true. But in terms of the mid to late game, they are actually a powerhouse because of the number of cards that have probably hit their drop zone. I think that's as simply as I can put it. We can go look at the cards so that you have a better idea, but keep in mind that the drop zone is basically a resource for this clan. The first card that I want to look at is the only G4 that I'm going to be looking at today, which is Bandit Rum. Pirate King of Secret Schemes Bandit Rum. A regular stride with a very simple skill. When this unit attack hits a Vanguard, choose up to one card from your drop zone, call it to R, it gets 2000 power until end of turn. If you notice, a lot of these superior calls will be happening in phases such as the battle phase. This means that, much like the rest of Magallanica, you can actually attack for lots of tiny attacks, or maybe even one big swing. And it is interesting to note that many of the Vanguards are very, very capable of returning cards back into the field from the drop zone. Because a card is in the drop zone, it is actually of almost the same resource as if it was in your hand. This makes it very, very open and very, very wide in terms of choices. As the game progresses, you will have more cards into your drop zone, and the more cards there are in the drop zone, the more choices you have to call this, making it slowly a little bit stronger. This is not a card that is used so much nowadays, but I think it's a good place to start when trying to learn this clan. They tend to gain power when they come from the drop zone, they tend to use things from the drop zone, and sometimes it is more important that they come from the drop zone, which I'll get into a little bit later. Looking down to the G3s, that's the only G4 I want to look at because the rest are a bit too complicated for a beginner series such as this, is of course the strider of the clan, Nightrunner. Vampire Princess of Nightfog Nightrunner. For some reason, the Japanese translation sometimes make it king, which is a bit strange, but let's just skip that. When you stride, you may pay the cost of Counterblast 1. If you do, choose up to one card from your drop zone, call it to R, and that unit gets 2000 power, very similar to what Bandit Rum had just done. Her GB2, which is a skill that you will almost never use, but I think is notable even though we will almost never use it, is when your rear guard is put into the drop zone, you may put 3 cards from the top of your deck into your drop zone. If you do, you may call it to R. Noticeably here, your deck is actually becoming the resource. Because you have a larger deck or some cards extra, then you can discard them in favor of gaining more into your field. Now, this is something that you're going to have to be very careful with because it's actually far more powerful early game, but can lead to very, very awkward deck outs late game. A skill that you don't want to abuse too much, and thankfully this skill is only once per turn, otherwise it could have been used to some very, very great effect. That is the great G3 of Granblue and the card that really did put them into their new setting currently. But I think the one card that really upped the ante, really changed the way Granblue thought about things, was most definitely the Break Ride. This Break Ride in turn created the situation where you just spam called. And before this point, they were a very technical clan, but they really couldn't create too many things without using up too many resources. Lord of the Seven Seas Night Mist, one of the original Night Mists. When a Granblue rides this unit, choose your Vanguard, and until end of turn it gets 10,000 power. Choose 2 Granblue from your drop zone, call them to R, those unit gets 5,000 power until end of turn. At the end of the turn, retire those units. In other words, they are only temporarily returned from the drop zone, and they are on the field, they can do additional attacks, but they die at the end of the turn. Now, because of so many requirements into this skill, it is a very open card to a lot of different ways of planning. Even today, I do hear that some people still use this card because of how versatile it is and the fact that it has the Seven Seas sub-clan name in it. But what you have to note is, back in the day, this was the card to grab. It allowed you to grab 2 things from your drop zone, make them usable again, and retire them for later use, all over again with almost no cost. That's something that I have to note when it comes to Granblue. You're going to notice a lot of cards that are actually well costed. They are costed appropriately, but some of the cards actually have a cost that you might not expect, and that makes them actually very, very dangerous for many different reasons, especially for your opponent. Moving on to the G2, I want to look at 3 cards. The first one is, of course, the card that I probably couldn't get away with without talking about, Ruin Shade, which is a card that works on Vanguard and Rearguard. This is a very, very old card. When this unit attacks, if you have a Granblue Vanguard, you may pay the cost of discarding 2 cards from the top of your deck. If you do, it is an 11k attacker. This can be done quite early into the game. It can be done on Vanguard or Rearguard. The amount of choices that you have because of this is quite large. And more important than anything else is the fact that you can drop cards early. This means that you can plan out, have enough cards for all your special calls later into the game. And it also gives you some leeway into planning out your attack. Because if you know that you're not so confident about having enough drop zone for the later turns, you can actually put these in to speed things along. Because as I've mentioned, they are actually stronger in the mid game. Now their mid game is once they've got about 10 cards in the drop zone, I think. That's probably where it starts, maybe a bit further. And to get to that point, they're going to need something like Ruin Shade to get the job done. Even today, I think it's still used in some cases, but I definitely don't think it's a definite include. The next card I want to look at is King Serpent. When this card is placed on Rearguard from your drop zone, Soul Charge 1 and face up a face down card in your damage zone. This card by itself actually refreshes one of the most basic resources in the game, the Counterblast and the Soul. Because of this, some people even now still use such a card, maybe not so much anymore, but I still think it is something to consider even though it's an 8k because it does refresh the costing, which is something very, very important for a clan like this. And finally, that card was rather simple. This card is just as simple but probably even more important. When Corrupt Dragon is placed to your Rearguard from drop zone, if you have a Granblue Vanguard, this unit gets 3,000 power until end of turn. Corrupt Dragon is a very simple card. But I think, much like some of the other cards that I've noted before and have shown you, you will see a very, very distinct lack here. By calling it from hand, you actually remove its skill. It is completely useless when coming from hand. It is far stronger when it comes from your drop zone. This means that if you have the ability to multiple call or call over a number of turns, you would prefer if it went back into the drop zone at the end of every turn. This means that this card is actually best used when special called from the drop zone. You will notice such cards pop up every now and again when it comes to Granblue, that they actually have better effects when they come from the drop zone. This means that their drop zone is actually worth more than if they were in hand. Otherwise, they are actually very, very vanilla. This is probably the greatest problem of Granblue, and probably where a lot of the deck planning and strategy that comes with the clan is. Cards that come from hand are actually far weaker than cards that come from the drop zone. Because of this, it means that guarding and planning your phases are going to be very important. If you have to guard with it during your guard step to ensure that the following turn you can play a Corrupt Dragon onto your lane, it might actually be far more beneficial than keeping it in your hand, guarding with something else, and placing it onto the field otherwise. This gives you a little bit more clarity of movement and many other options in how you want to go about planning your turn. And it means that you have some flexibility and some leeway into your choices when it comes to guarding. Because of this, I can't really say that the clan is very simple because there are a lot of things to consider. Mostly, what goes into your drop zone is going to be a factor of what your opponent does as much as what you will do in return. Moving along to the G1. The first G1 I want to look at is probably the big girl herself. This is another card that's still very old, but I think was so important to the clan that really needed to have a shout out. Stirling Banshee. Stirling Banshee's skill is when it's placed on rearguard from drop zone, just like before. If you have a Granblue Vanguard, you may pay the cost of Soul Blast 1 if you do draw a card. This means that every time it is returned onto the field and you Soul Blast, it actually gains you a card. This is very, very powerful because it means that you add cards to your guard potential while at the same time fielding an extra 6k. Not the greatest in the world, but not so bad either because the number of plus powers makes it a little bit moot what their power was originally. Stirling Banshee is still, I think, a rather powerful card. Being able to draw a card for Soul Blast 1 means that you can save up a little bit more soul, and it means that you clear up your choices, giving you more options to play around because of the Soul Blasting mechanic. It is also quite notable that you should think about, because they use the Soul Blast mechanic, it actually adds to your drop zone. So cards that are Soul Blasted also have to be picked accordingly based on your needs. It means that Soul Charging and Soul Blasting becomes another step into making a formidable drop zone. Moving along, we have the G1 Samurai Spirit. Samurai Spirit is one of the oldest cards in the clan, and it really doesn't show too much on the skill. For the low cost of Counterblast 1 and retiring a rearguard, you may call this card from your drop zone back into the field. This means that it actually replaces a card into a G1. In many ways, you can see this as a card that refreshes itself into a Samurai Spirit. And probably more importantly, it means that if you have to call multiple G2s, you can actually retire one of them and turn them into a G1 as you see fit. This means that it is very flexible. It means that when you're going up against a Granblue, you can expect that unless you have some way of dealing with it personally, they will probably have a near full field. Cards like these make the transition to such a field very easy and the planning around it very, very consistent. Next card, and the last G1 that I'm going to look at, is a very similar card. Deadly Nightmare is one of the older G1s, just like Samurai Spirit, but this card does almost exactly the same thing. The only difference that it does is it actually uses Soul Blast. This means this is something that I really want to show together with Samurai Spirit because they have options. Granblue is a clan of utility. It is not a clan of heavy power. It is not a clan of technical prowess. It is a clan of utility. They're being able to always have a full field, to always have a complete setup no matter what you do, and to revive that setup every time it dies means that they are a very tricky clan to go up against. Rear guards are cheap, guarding is easy, but the planning and the strategy of how to make those 3 short attacks work in your favor is going to be the key to making this clan work. It is a clan that derives its strength from the planning of the leader rather than the cards themselves. The cards are all great. They've got a lot of flexibility, you've got a lot of choices. You can maneuver yourself into situations to clear up and create the whole field, but whether or not you really need it is going to be the sign of a great player. Finally, we can't go on talking about Granblue without talking about one of the weirder cards that I think were probably maybe used a bit too much, or maybe not enough in some cases, but is still a difficult card to plan around because of the fact that it doesn't really fit into the usual grade lineup, but is still something to take note of because of the number of abilities that it gives you. Chappie the Ghosty is one of the original Ghosties. When this unit is placed on the guard circle, search your deck for up to 1 Granblue, put it into the drop zone, and shuffle your deck. This is a problematic card for a number of reasons. First, it doesn't really fit into the usual grade, which means you are one step closer to possibly grade locking yourself. It is a 10k guard, but it is only a 5k unit, making it not very useful as a booster or as an attacker. But most importantly, it lets you choose any card from your deck and put it into your drop zone. This makes consistency of your drop zone even more powerful. Having the option to pick out any card that you want, having the option to place that card into your drop zone as you need it, makes this a great utility card for the clan. Do you have enough space to put a card like Chappie in? That's up to you. There are newer cards that do similar things to this, but I think it is very important to know the first to understand how they used to think and how you should plan for the number of different ways that they do this. Now, if you aren't a big fan of Chappie and how they operate, probably the first card that I can point you towards is Captain Nightkid, one of the original bosses. As you can note, he's a 5k booster, so he's a really decent forerunner. When you use his skill, it's actually quite similar to Chappie because of a number of reasons. So, Counterblast 1, put it into the soul, choose 10 cards from your top deck, and pick one, put it into your drop zone, shuffle your deck. It is doing a very similar thing. It isn't as strong as Chappie since it's not the entire deck, but it does do a very, very good imitation, and that makes it very strong. And probably the last card that I want to talk about, I think really should be noted here because of its overall strength and the reason that it became so strong that they had to control it, but it's still a powerful card and does really close out this clan quite well. 7 Seas Apprentice Nightrunner. Nightrunner's skill is from the drop zone, put 4 cards from the top of your deck into your drop zone at the beginning of your main phase. If you have a Vanguard with 7 Seas in its name, you may call this unit onto R as rest. At the end of the turn, retire this unit. Because you can insta-call a unit, you can actually retire it for the cost of other cards, making it a +1 for very little effort, and it means that you will always have extra cards on your field that isn't really stoppable because it happens at the start of your main phase. Now, Nightrunner and the 7 Seas by themselves are alright. One could even say they are probably one of the strongest rushes in the game, and I would tend to agree for that. But one of their biggest weaknesses is the fact that they struggle with activating their effects. One of the greatest problems with Granblue is very much that. It is the fact that to activate a lot of their skills, it has to come from the drop zone. You tend to spend a lot of your deck fulfilling these advantages, and it means that they burn out very quickly. They actually use up their resources. They are very strong in the mid game, but that's because they've been reducing their cards into their drop zone. Their biggest weakness is going to be deck out because they don't have a lot of ways of putting cards back into their deck. That means that you're going to have to watch out, because if you can't keep up with their mid game or you can't keep up with their early game, you're going to be in for a really long fight, and a very strong one at that, but they will most likely deck out faster than you. A clan like Granblue has many different options. It is a clan of strengths, it is a clan of fancy plays. When you are playing against the Granblue, you have to be very careful, because choosing to retire or choosing to spin any of the rear guards may not be to your benefit. In many cases, it's actually to their benefit, so you have to be very careful about that. In that sense, you are almost always forced to attack the Vanguard instead, because a kill is still a kill. When the Vanguard goes down, everyone goes down. But planning out and understanding this is going to take a lot of very meticulous thought and puzzle solving on your part to understand what they were going for, what they were planning for, and how to alleviate those problems. In many respects, Granblue is an expensive clan. A lot of their skills actually cost quite a lot for what they do. Counterblast for just a refresh instead of a free call, reducing cards from your deck it is rather expensive. Now, it doesn't feel rather expensive because in all reality, you only need one card in your deck when you win the game. So it doesn't matter too much how many cards do you reduce. But if you note the number of cards that are reduced and the number of triggers that disappear from the deck because of all of this haphazard discarding from the top of your deck, you're going to have to watch for all of these things when going up against a Granblue to get a better feel of exactly how far behind they are putting themselves to use all of their effects. Otherwise, I can't really say Granblue is something of a clan that you want to look into until you're very comfortable with the game. It is a clan where guarding, soul blasting, healing becomes very important because it adds things into your pseudo hand or drop zone. Because of that and many other reasons, I feel that it is definitely an expert's clan and one that takes some skill. Night Rose and the 7 Seas and all of those things do make it easier, but I still think it is a clan that should only be for those who are looking for a bit more challenge in their game. When going up against this, you have to be very careful about the choices that you make, who you target, and in almost every case, the Vanguard is their weakest point rather than their rearguard. But even then, don't push them too hard because their costing on Counterblast and Soul is actually one of their driving weaknesses. If you can reduce that in the early mid game, they reduce the ability for them to fulfill their usual attacks, and in that sense it actually means that they slow down. After you get them to slow down, they might be forced to use their deck to cost all of their super calls, and because of their superior calling using the top of the deck, you actually reduce their game plan later on, but it does make them slightly bit stronger. All that being said, I do think that Granblue is a clan of great things. It is a clan of superior pirates with not many great choices when you're going up against them, but it does take a lot of planning, a lot of strategy. Building a deck around Granblue is a difficult and probably a very, very rewarding effort. And it's something you should look into if you think that some of the other clans are a little bit too simple. In any case, this has been extremewirehead, and that is my clan intro. If you're looking more into this clan, I would suggest some of the newer trial decks to get you started. But otherwise, that's it, and I'll see you on the next clan intro. Peace.